The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of my mother-in-law's pristine foyer. Crystal fragments scattered like tiny diamonds across the white tiles, each piece reflecting the horrified expressions of my husband's family. But it wasn't the broken glass that made everyone gasp. It wasn't even the red wine stain spreading across Margaret's designer Easter tablecloth. It was the words that had just come out of Agent Rodriguez's mouth, words that would unravel 20 years of lies and change everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mrs. Chen-Lewis, the FBI agent said, his badge gleaming under the chandelier light, we've been looking for Major Lewis for a very long time. My name is Isabella Chen-Lewis, and until that Easter Sunday in April, I thought my biggest problem was convincing my in-laws that I was worthy of their precious son. I thought the worst thing that could happen was being permanently banned from family gatherings. I had no idea that my husband Marcus had been living under a false identity for 2 decades, or that our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of secrets that went deeper than I could have ever imagined. It started 3 months earlier, in January, when I made what I thought was a simple mistake. Margaret Lewis, my mother-in-law, had been planning her annual Easter extravaganza for weeks. The Lewis family took their holidays seriously, especially Easter, which Margaret treated like a combination of the Met Gala and a presidential inauguration. Every year, she hosted 40-plus family members and friends at their sprawling estate in Connecticut, complete with a sit-down dinner, an elaborate egg hunt, and enough floral arrangements to stock a small flower shop. I had been married to Marcus for 8 years, and every single Easter had been the same routine. Margaret would assign me the most menial tasks while showering praise on her other daughter-in-law, Priscilla, who seemed impossible of doing anything wrong in Margaret's eyes. Priscilla could burn water, and Margaret would call it gourmet. Meanwhile, I could spend hours perfecting homemade dinner rolls, only to have Margaret suggest that store-bought might have been a better choice. This year, I was determined to finally win her approval. I had been planning my contribution for weeks, researching traditional family recipes and practicing dishes until they were perfect. I wanted to make something that would show Margaret I understood and respected the Lewis family traditions. That's when I stumbled upon what I thought was the perfect opportunity. While helping Margaret organize old family photos for a display, I came across a faded picture tucked behind others in an album. It showed a younger version of Marcus in what looked like a military uniform, standing with a group of other soldiers. He looked so different, so serious, and there was something about his posture and expression that I had never seen in our everyday life together. When I asked Margaret about it, her reaction was immediate and strange. She practically snatched the photo from my hands, her face going pale before flushing red. "That's nothing," she said quickly, shoving the picture into a drawer. "Just some old costume party nonsense. You know how young men like to play dress-up." But I had seen enough military families growing up to recognize a real uniform when I saw one. My father had served in the army, and I knew the difference between authentic military dress and a costume. The photo showed Marcus with sergeant stripes clearly visible, standing in front of what looked like an official military building. This wasn't dress-up, this was real. When I brought it up with Marcus that evening, his reaction was even stranger than his mother's. He went completely quiet, that muscle in his jaw twitching the way it did when he was stressed about work. "Mom's right," he finally said, not meeting my eyes. "It was just some Halloween thing from college. I can't even remember when that was taken." But I remembered everything about Marcus's college years because he had told me those stories dozens of times. He had studied business at State University, joined a fraternity, spent his junior year abroad in London. There had never been any mention of military service, not even ROTC. When we filled out our marriage license, the section for military service had been left blank. When we applied for our mortgage, same thing. Marcus Lewis had never served in the military, according to every official document I'd ever seen. The more I thought about it, the more little inconsistencies began to bother me. Marcus was extraordinarily organized and disciplined in ways that seemed almost military-like, but he claimed it was just his business background. He woke up at exactly 5:30 every morning, made his bed with hospital corners, and could pack a suitcase with geometric precision. He knew an unusual amount about military history and strategy for someone his only interest was supposed to be corporate finance. Sometimes, late at night, I would catch him staring off into the distance with an expression that looked haunted, but when I asked what he was thinking about, he would just say work stress. I decided to do a little detective work of my own. I started by searching online for any mention of Marcus Lewis in connection with military service. Nothing came up. I tried different spellings, different middle initials, different time periods. Still nothing. Then I tried searching for the building in the background of the photo, spending hours looking through military base websites until I found a match. It was Fort Braxton, a training facility for special operations forces. The pieces were starting to form a picture that made no sense with the Marcus I knew. My husband was a quiet, methodical man who worked in financial consulting and spent his weekends reading business journals and tending his herb garden. The idea that he might have been involved in special operations seemed absurd, but the evidence was right there in that photograph. I began paying closer attention to other details about Marcus's past that had never quite added up. He claimed to have grown up in Connecticut, but his accent occasionally slipped into something that sounded more Southern. He said his parents had moved around a lot for his father's work, which explained why he didn't have many childhood friends. But he could never quite keep the details of those moves straight. When we visited places that should have been familiar from his childhood, he seemed to be seeing them for the first time. The breaking point came in late February when I decided to plan a surprise for Marcus's 35th birthday. I thought it would be sweet to track down some of his old college friends and organize a reunion. I started with the fraternity he claimed to have joined, Alpha Beta Sigma at State University. According to their alumni directory, no Marcus Lewis had ever been a member. I tried the business school, the study abroad program, even the general student records that were publicly available. Nothing. It was as if the Marcus Lewis who was supposed to have attended State University had never existed. When I confronted Marcus about this, his reaction was unlike anything I had ever seen from him. He went completely still, his face draining of color, and for a moment he looked genuinely frightened. Then the expression was gone so quickly I almost thought I had imagined it, replaced by his usual calm demeanor. "You must have gotten the information wrong," he said, his voice carefully controlled.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Maybe they have different record systems, or maybe some of the data got lost when they updated their computers. But I knew what I had found, or rather, what I hadn't found. I pressed him for more details, asking for names of professors or classmates, asking to see his diploma, asking for anything that could verify the stories he had been telling me for 8 years. With each question, Marcus became more evasive and more agitated. Finally, he exploded in a way that was completely out of character for him. "Why can't you just leave this alone, Isabella? Why do you have to dig into every little detail? Some things are private. Some things are better left in the past." That's when I knew for certain that my husband was hiding something big. The Marcus I married was patient and methodical and never raised his voice. He approached problems like puzzles to be solved, not obstacles to be avoided. The fact that he was getting emotional and defensive told me that whatever he was hiding, it was significant enough to shake his usual composure. I tried a different approach. Instead of confronting Marcus directly, I started paying attention to his daily routines, looking for clues about who he really was. I noticed that he received mail addressed to different variations of his name. Sometimes it was Marcus A. Lewis, sometimes M. Andrew Lewis, sometimes just M. Lewis. When I asked about the inconsistency, he said it was just different companies using different formats from different applications he had filled out over the years. I started opening some of those letters, telling myself it was just curiosity about our household finances. Most were routine bills and statements, but buried among them, I found correspondence from a Veterans Benefits office. The letter was addressed to Major M.A. Lewis and referenced medical benefits related to service-connected disabilities. When Marcus came home that day, I was waiting for him with the letter in my hand. "You want to explain this?" I asked, holding up the document. Marcus stared at the letter for a long moment, and I watched a series of emotions play across his face. Fear, resignation, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. He sat down heavily on our couch and put his head in his hands. "I can explain," he said quietly, "but once I tell you, there's no going back. There are things about my past that I've kept hidden for very good reasons, and knowing about them could put you in danger." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. I thought maybe he had been involved in some classified military work and was worried about security clearances or confidentiality agreements. I had no idea how literally he meant the word danger, or how soon that danger would become very real. Marcus began to tell me a story that sounded like something out of a spy novel. According to him, he had indeed served in the military, not as a regular soldier, but as part of a highly classified special operations unit. His real name was Major Michael Andrew Lewis, and he had been involved in covert missions in several countries during the early 2000s. The work had been dangerous and morally complicated, involving intelligence gathering, asset protection, and what he carefully described as conflict resolution. The reason he had changed his identity, he said, was because his unit had been involved in an operation that went wrong. People had died, including civilians, and there had been a cover-up at the highest levels of the military. Marcus and several other members of his unit had been given new identities and relocated as part of a witness protection program. They had been told that their lives would be in danger if their real identities ever became known, because powerful people had a vested interest in making sure the truth about the failed operation never came to light. As he told me this story, I found myself believing him, despite how outrageous it sounded. It explained so many of the inconsistencies I had noticed over the years. It explained his discipline, his knowledge of military matters, his occasional slips in accent and geography. It explained why he seemed to have no past before we met, and why his family was so protective of family photos and records. "Marcus and Robert aren't actually my parents," Marcus continued. "They're good people who agreed to help with my cover story in exchange for financial compensation from the government. They've been playing the role of my family for 15 years now, and they've done it so well that sometimes I think they've forgotten it's not real." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had spent 8 years trying to win the approval of people who weren't even really my in-laws. I had endured Margaret's criticism and coldness, had bent over backwards to try to fit into a family that was entirely fictional. Everything about my marriage, everything about the life we had built together had been based on lies. But even as I felt hurt and betrayed, I also felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, the pieces were fitting together. Finally, the man I had married was making sense to me. The Marcus who could pack a bag in 2 minutes flat, who never seemed rattled by emergencies, who moved through the world with a quiet awareness that I had always found attractive but couldn't explain, was finally revealed to be exactly who he appeared to be. "Why didn't you tell me this before we got married?" I asked. "Because the program was supposed to be temporary," Marcus said. "I was told it would last maybe 2 or 3 years, just until the heat died down. I thought I could keep the secret that long, and then we would figure out how to transition to a normal life. But the threat never went away. If anything, it's gotten worse over the years." As Marcus continued to explain, I learned that several members of his original unit had died under suspicious circumstances. Car accidents, heart attacks, house fires, all involving relatively young, healthy men who had been part of the same classified operation. Marcus believed they were being systematically eliminated by someone who wanted to make sure the truth about the failed mission never came to light. "That's why I've been so careful about maintaining the cover story," he said. "That's why I can never let my guard down. There are people out there who would kill to keep their secrets buried, and if they ever figure out where I am, both of us will be in danger." I asked him about the specific operation that had gone wrong, but Marcus refused to give me details. He said the less I knew, the safer I would be. All he would tell me was that it had involved a mission to recover stolen weapons-grade materials, that civilians had been killed in the crossfire, and that the official report had blamed the entire incident on local insurgents, rather than acknowledging the role of American special forces.
The people who ordered the cover-up are still in positions of power, Marcus said. Some of them have moved up to even higher levels of government and military leadership. They can't afford to have the truth come out because it would destroy their careers and potentially lead to war crimes charges. As the weeks passed after this revelation, I found myself looking at everything in my life differently. I understood now why Marcus was always so alert, why he insisted on checking locks twice before going to bed, why he had escape routes planned from every room in our house. I understood why he paid cash for as many things as possible, and why he had always been reluctant to leave digital footprints through social media or online shopping. Living with this knowledge was harder than I had expected. I found myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if the people around us were really who they claimed to be. I started noticing things that had never bothered me before, like cars that seemed to follow the same route we did, or people who appeared in multiple places where we spent time. Marcus assured me that his handlers in the witness protection program were still monitoring the situation, and that we would be warned if there was any immediate danger. But he also made it clear that the protection was limited. If our cover was blown, we would be on our own. This brings us to the events leading up to that fateful Easter Sunday. In early March, Marcus received a phone call that left him visibly shaken. He said it was from his handler, informing him that there had been some movement in the case. Someone had been asking questions, making inquiries that suggested they might be getting close to identifying the remaining members of Marcus's unit. "We might need to relocate," Marcus told me that night. "They might need to give us new identities again." The thought of starting over completely, of leaving behind the life we had built together, was devastating. Despite all the lies and deception, I loved my husband. I loved the home we had created, the friends we had made, the routines and traditions that had given structure to our days. The idea of walking away from all of that felt like a kind of death. That's when I made what I now realized was a terrible mistake. Instead of staying quiet and following Marcus's lead, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I thought that if I could somehow resolve the situation, if I could find a way to expose the truth about the covered-up operation, then Marcus would no longer need to live in hiding. We could have a normal life together, based on honesty instead of deception. I began researching the incident Marcus had described, using the few details he had given me to try to piece together what had really happened. I spent hours online, searching through news archives and government documents, looking for any mention of missing weapons or civilian casualties that matched the time frame and general location Marcus had mentioned. What I found was troubling but not conclusive. There were indeed reports of several incidents involving American forces and civilian casualties during the time period Marcus had specified. There were also reports of investigations that had been suddenly closed or classified, and of military personnel who had been quietly reassigned or retired in the aftermath of controversial operations. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that Marcus was telling the truth about the cover-up. But I also began to realize that the conspiracy was even larger and more dangerous than he had led me to believe. The people involved weren't just military officers trying to hide a tactical error. They were part of a network that included defense contractors, intelligence officials, and political appointees, all of whom had financial or career incentives to keep the truth buried. I started reaching out to journalists and advocacy organizations that specialized in military accountability and government transparency. I thought that if I could find the right person to investigate the story, someone with the resources and expertise to dig deeper than I could on my own, then we might finally be able to break free from the cycle of secrecy and fear. This was my second major mistake. By contacting these organizations, I had put our names and information into databases that could be accessed by people with the right connections.
I had essentially sent up a flare signal announcing our location to anyone who might be looking for us. Marcus found out about my research when he discovered my browser history on our shared laptop. His reaction was immediate and frightening. He grabbed me by the shoulders, his face intense in a way I had never seen before. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Do you understand that you may have just signed our death warrant?" That night, Marcus made several phone calls to numbers he wouldn't let me see. I could hear him speaking in clipped, urgent tones, using words and phrases that sounded like military jargon. When he finished, he told me we had maybe 24 hours before we would need to disappear completely. "Pack one bag," he said, "only essentials. We leave everything else behind." The thought of abandoning our entire life on such short notice was overwhelming. I begged Marcus to reconsider, to give his handlers more time to assess the threat, to find some other solution that wouldn't require us to start over from nothing. That's when Marcus told me something that changed everything. His handler had informed him that the threat wasn't coming from the original conspirators. Instead, someone had been tracking down members of his unit in order to recruit them for a new operation. The people who had been dying weren't being eliminated to keep them quiet. They were being killed because they had refused to participate in something that was apparently even more dangerous and morally questionable than their original mission. Whoever is behind this has resources and connections that go beyond anything we've dealt with before, Marcus said. They're not just trying to cover up the past, they're trying to use our skills and our vulnerability for something new. As we prepared to flee, I realized that I couldn't leave without somehow saying goodbye to the life we were abandoning. I thought about all the people who would wonder what had happened to us, all the relationships and commitments we were breaking by disappearing without explanation. That's when I made my third and most catastrophic mistake. I decided that we should attend one last family gathering before we vanished forever. Easter Sunday at Margaret and Robert's house would be our farewell to the fictional family that had sheltered us for so many years. I thought it would be a harmless way to maintain appearances while we prepared for our escape. Marcus was against the idea from the beginning. He said it was too risky, that we should leave immediately and worry about explanations later. But I wore him down with arguments about maintaining our cover, about not doing anything that would seem suspicious or out of character. "One last Easter," I pleaded. "Let me say goodbye to this life properly." Against his better judgment, Marcus agreed. We would attend the Easter dinner, stay for a few hours, and then leave quietly that evening. By Monday morning, we would be halfway across the country with new identities and a new life. I spent the week before Easter preparing what I thought would be my final contribution to a Lewis family gathering.
I made Marcus's favorite dessert, a complex trifle that took 2 days to assemble properly. I bought a new dress and had my hair done, wanting to look perfect for what I knew would be the last time Margaret would see me as her daughter-in-law. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally going to get what I had always wanted, Margaret's approval and acceptance, just in time to lose it forever. But I thought it was important to end this chapter of our lives with dignity and grace, even if the people involved would never understand the real reason for our sudden departure. On Easter morning, Marcus was more tense than usual. He checked his phone constantly, monitoring news feeds and encrypted messages from his handlers. He had prepared several contingency plans for leaving the party quickly if necessary, and he made me memorize the locations of cash and documents he had hidden in various places around the house. "If anything happens," he told me, "if we get separated for any reason, go to the safe house location I showed you. Don't trust anyone else. Don't contact anyone from your old life. Just get there and wait for me." As we drove to Margaret and Robert's house that morning, I found myself looking at the familiar Connecticut landscape with new eyes, knowing I would probably never see it again. The cherry trees were in full bloom, and the countryside looked like a postcard of perfect American domesticity. It was hard to believe that underneath this peaceful surface, there were dangerous secrets and hidden threats that could destroy everything at a moment's notice. We arrived at the Lewis estate at exactly noon, as we had every Easter for the past 8 years. The house looked the same as always, decorated with elaborate floral arrangements and festive banners.
Other family members were already arriving, and I could see children running around the lawn with baskets, getting ready for the traditional egg hunt. Margaret greeted us at the door with her usual mixture of warmth and subtle criticism. She complimented my dress while simultaneously suggesting that the color might not be the most flattering for my complexion. She thanked me for bringing the trifle, while mentioning that she hoped it wouldn't be too rich for the older family members. Under normal circumstances, these comments would have stung and made me feel insecure about my place in the family. But knowing that this was all an elaborate performance, that Margaret was playing a role just as much as we were, somehow made it easier to smile and respond graciously. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself studying the other family members with new awareness. Were any of them real? Were Robert's siblings actually his siblings, or were they also part of the elaborate cover story? Were the cousins and aunts and uncles genuine relatives, or were some of them also government assets playing parts in this ongoing drama? Marcus seemed more relaxed as the hours passed without incident. He helped with the egg hunt, made conversation with the other men about sports and business, and even smiled genuinely when Margaret complimented the trifle I had made. For a few hours, it almost felt like we were really part of a normal family, having a normal holiday celebration. That's when everything fell apart. We were just finishing dinner when the doorbell rang. Margaret looked surprised since she wasn't expecting any more guests, but she went to answer it with her usual grace of hostility toward unexpected visitors. A few moments later, we heard voices in the foyer, and Margaret returned to the dining room with a puzzled expression. "There are some people here who say they need to speak with Marcus," she announced. "They say they're from the government." The blood drained from Marcus's face so quickly I thought he might faint. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and I could see his hand moving instinctively toward the place where I knew he kept a concealed weapon. "Stay calm," he whispered to me. "Follow my lead." We walked to the foyer together, where 3 people in dark suits were waiting, 2 men and 1 woman, all with the unmistakable bearing of federal agents. The woman stepped forward and showed us her badge. "Agent Rodriguez, FBI," she said. "We need to speak with you about a matter of national security." That's when I dropped the champagne flute, sending crystal fragments scattering across Margaret's perfect marble floor. That's when Agent Rodriguez looked directly at Marcus and spoke the words that would change everything. "Mrs. Chen-Lewis, we've been looking for Major Lewis for a very long time." The silence that followed Agent Rodriguez's words stretched like a taut wire about to snap. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the distant laughter of children still playing in the garden, and the rapid beating of my own heart. Marcus stood frozen beside me, his face a careful mask that I had learned to recognize as his preparation for danger. Margaret stepped forward, her social training overriding her confusion. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. This is my son Marcus Lewis, and he's never been in the military. Perhaps you're looking for someone else with a similar name." Agent Rodriguez's expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she had expected this response. "Mrs. Lewis, I understand this is confusing, but we have definitive proof that the man you know as Marcus Lewis is actually Major Michael Andrew Lewis, formerly of the 82nd Special Operations Division." Robert appeared in the doorway behind us, his face flushed from wine and the warmth of the dining room. "What's all this about? Is there some problem with the caterers?" The other 2 agents stepped slightly apart, and I noticed how their positions blocked the exits from the foyer. This wasn't a casual inquiry. They had come prepared for resistance, possibly for violence. Marcus must have noticed the same thing, because I felt his hand brush against mine in what I recognized as a warning signal. "Mr. Lewis," Agent Rodriguez addressed Robert directly, "we know about the arrangement you've had with the Department of Defense for the past 15 years. We know about the monthly payments, the documentation assistance, and the cover story you've been maintaining. What we need to know is whether you've had any contact with outside parties regarding Major Lewis's location." The color drained from Robert's face so completely that he looked like he might collapse. Margaret grabbed his arm to steady him, her own composure finally cracking. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said, but her voice had lost its usual authority. One of the male agents, a tall man with graying temples, stepped forward. "Agent Chen," he introduced himself, and I wondered if the shared surname was coincidence or if they had chosen him specifically to put me at ease. Mrs. Chen-Lewis, we need you to understand that your husband has been in federal protection for his own safety and for reasons of national security. That protection has been compromised, and we need to move quickly to ensure everyone's safety. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding us. How did you find us?
Our handlers assured us the location was secure. Agent Rodriguez exchanged a look with her colleagues before responding. Your handlers are dead, Major Lewis. All 3 of them were killed in the past 72 hours. Their files were accessed before we could secure them. The words hit like physical blows. I felt my knees buckle slightly, and Marcus's hand shot out to steady me. The people who had been protecting us, who had promised to keep us safe, were gone. We were completely exposed. Who killed them? Marcus asked, and I could hear the soldier creeping back into his voice, the careful civilian facade beginning to slip away. We're still investigating, Agent Chen said, but we have reason to believe it's connected to Operation Blackwater, the mission you were involved in 23 years ago. I saw Margaret and Robert exchange confused glances. Even in their role as fake parents, they clearly hadn't been told the full details of why Marcus needed protection. They had been playing their parts without understanding the true danger involved. Agent Rodriguez continued, her voice urgent. Major Lewis, in the past week, someone has been systematically eliminating anyone with knowledge of Operation Blackwater. Your former commanding officer was found dead in his apartment in Virginia 3 days ago. Lieutenant Morrison died in what appeared to be a car accident in Oregon yesterday. Sergeant Williams's house in Texas burned down last night with him inside. Each name hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't just colleagues from his past. They were men he had served with, men he had trusted with his life in combat situations. The fact that they were all dying now meant that whatever was happening was bigger and more immediate than we had realized. How many of us are left? Marcus asked quietly. As of this morning, we believe there are only 3 surviving members of your original unit. You, Captain Sarah Mitchell, who's currently in protective custody in Seattle, and Staff Sergeant David Park, who went underground 2 years ago and hasn't been seen since. The family members who had been enjoying their Easter dinner began filtering into the foyer, drawn by the commotion and the presence of federal agents in their home. Marcus's cousin James appeared with his wife and teenage children, all of them staring in confusion at the scene unfolding before them. Everyone needs to leave the house immediately, Agent Rodriguez announced to the gathering crowd. This is a federal security matter, and the premises need to be evacuated for your own safety. Margaret found her voice again, the hostess training of a lifetime taking over, even in the face of incomprehensible circumstances. Surely there's been some mistake. This is Easter dinner with our family. Whatever issues you have with Marcus can certainly be resolved without disrupting everyone's holiday. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Lewis, I understand this is difficult to accept, but the people who killed Major Lewis's handlers and unit members may already know about this location. Every minute we delay puts everyone here at greater risk. As if summoned by his words, we heard the sound of car engines in the driveway, multiple vehicles arriving at high speed. Agent Rodriguez immediately drew her weapon, motioning for everyone to get down. That's not our backup, she said into her radio. We have multiple unknown vehicles approaching the target location. The sound of shattering glass came from somewhere in the back of the house, followed by shouts and heavy footsteps. Marcus grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the stairs, his military training taking over completely. Isabella, get upstairs now. Find a room with a lock and stay away from the windows. But before we could move, armed figures in dark clothing burst through the front door, moving with the coordinated precision of a professional tactical team. They weren't wearing any identifying uniforms or badges, and their faces were covered by balaclavas that made them look like something out of a nightmare. Agent Rodriguez shouted commands to her colleagues while returning fire, but it was immediately clear that they were outnumbered and outgunned. The attackers had come prepared for exactly this scenario, with body armor, automatic weapons, and what appeared to be military-grade equipment. In the chaos that followed, I lost track of Marcus as family members scattered in all directions, screaming and trying to find cover behind furniture and in doorways. Margaret was shouting for everyone to get down, while Albert was trying to push the children toward the back of the house.
The sound of gunfire was deafening in the enclosed space, and the smell of cordite began to fill the air. I found myself pressed against the wall beneath the main staircase, my elegant Easter dress torn and my knees scraped from diving for cover. Through the forest of legs and the haze of smoke, I could see Agent Rodriguez taking cover behind the marble pillars that separated the foyer from the main hallway. She was speaking rapidly into her radio, calling for backup and medical assistance. One of the attackers was shouting orders in a voice that was strangely familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have heard it before. Secure the primary target. Eliminate any witnesses. We have limited time before local authorities respond. The cold calculation in his voice sent chills down my spine. These weren't random criminals or foreign terrorists. They spoke English with American accents, moved like professional soldiers, and had intelligence about our location that suggested inside information. Someone with access to federal databases had sold us out. Marcus appeared suddenly beside me, having somehow made his way around the edge of the room using cover techniques that would have impressed a Navy SEAL. He had acquired a weapon from somewhere, probably one of the fallen agents, and his entire demeanor had transformed from suburban husband to combat soldier. "We're going out the kitchen door," he whispered urgently. "Stay low, move fast, and don't look back no matter what you hear." We began crawling across the floor toward the rear of the house, using overturned furniture and the marble pillars as cover. Behind us, the battle continued to rage, with Agent Chen and his remaining colleague trying to hold defensive positions while the attackers methodically cleared room by room. As we reached the entrance to the dining room, I caught sight of Margaret huddled in the corner with several of the children, her face pale with terror, but her arms wrapped protectively around her grandchildren. The woman who had spent 8 years criticizing my cooking and my clothes was now shielding kids with her own body, and I felt a sudden surge of respect for her courage. The kitchen was empty when we reached it, but we could hear footsteps and voices coming from other parts of the house as the attackers continued their systematic search. Marcus checked the back door, then motioned for me to stay put while he examined the yard for additional threats. Through the kitchen window, I could see several black SUVs parked on the lawn, their engines still running.
There were at least 2 more armed figures positioned outside, covering the exits and watching for anyone trying to escape. We were completely surrounded. Marcus returned with grim news. "They've got the whole place locked down. Professional setup, military precision. This isn't some random hit squad." As if to emphasize his point, we heard a new voice shouting commands from the front of the house. This one was different from the others, carrying an authority that suggested he was in charge of the operation. "Major Lewis, we know you're here. We're not interested in hurting civilians, but we will if necessary. Come out now and this can end without further bloodshed." Marcus's jaw tightened, and I could see him calculating odds and possibilities. "They want me alive," he said quietly. "Otherwise, they would have just killed everyone and searched the bodies. That gives us some leverage." The voice continued, echoing through the house with practiced authority. "Major Lewis, you know who I am. You know why we're here. The situation has changed since your unit went into hiding. There are new threats that require your particular skills, and your country needs you again." I saw recognition flash across Marcus's face, followed by something that looked like betrayal and rage. He knew the voice, knew who was leading this assault on our Easter gathering. "Colonel Harrison," Marcus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the house. "I should have known you were behind this. Still cleaning up your own messes by sacrificing your subordinates." The response came immediately, tinged with what sounded like genuine regret. "Michael, this isn't about the past. This is about preventing something much worse from happening. We have intelligence about a terrorist attack that will make 9/11 look like a minor incident. We need the Blackwater team back together." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "The Blackwater team is dead, Harrison. You made sure of that when you hung us out to dry 23 years ago. The men who trusted you, who followed your orders into that disaster, they're all gone now, killed by your people to keep them quiet." The kitchen grew quiet as both sides seemed to be considering their next moves. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer, which meant that local police were finally responding to reports of gunfire. But I suspected that Colonel Harrison and his team had planned for that contingency as well.
Agent Rodriguez's voice came from somewhere near the front of the house, strained but determined. Federal agents on scene, multiple casualties, request immediate backup and medical assistance. Suspects are heavily armed and appear to have military training. Colonel Harrison's response was swift and coldly professional. Agent Rodriguez, this is a matter of national security that supersedes your jurisdiction. Stand down and allow us to complete our mission, and no further harm will come to civilians. Not happening, Colonel, Rodriguez shot back. Whatever authority you think you have, it doesn't extend to shooting up a private residence on American soil. The standoff continued for several more minutes, with both sides essentially trapped by the other's presence. Harrison's team couldn't complete their mission with federal agents as witnesses, and the FBI agents couldn't safely extract civilians while outnumbered and outgunned. That's when Marcus made a decision that changed everything. He stood up from our hiding place behind the kitchen island, his hands visible, but still holding his weapon. Harrison, I'll come with you willingly, on one condition. Everyone else walks away from this. The civilians, the agents, everyone. Michael, no, I whispered, grabbing his arm. You don't know what he really wants. You can't trust him. But Marcus gently pulled away from my grasp, his eyes focused on something beyond my understanding. Isabella, some things are bigger than what we want. If Harrison is telling the truth about a terrorist threat, then people are going to die if I don't help stop it. I can't live with that kind of blood on my hands. Colonel Harrison's voice carried a note of satisfaction. I knew you'd see reason, Michael. You always were the most principled member of your unit. That's exactly why we need you for this operation. As Marcus began walking toward the front of the house, I followed, despite his gestures for me to stay back. I wasn't going to let my husband walk into danger without knowing what was really happening, and I wasn't going to let him face whatever was coming next alone. The scene in the foyer was like something from a war zone. Several people were wounded, including one of the FBI agents who was being tended to by Margaret's daughter-in-law, Priscilla, who apparently had medical training I hadn't known about. Furniture was overturned, there were bullet holes in the walls, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Colonel Harrison stood in the center of it all, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He was wearing civilian clothes, but everything about his posture and demeanor screamed military officer. When he saw Marcus, his expression softened slightly, as if he were genuinely glad to see an old friend. "Michael," he said, extending his hand, "you look good. Civilian life seems to have agreed with you." Marcus didn't take the offered handshake.
Cut the pleasantries, Harrison. What's this really about? Because if you needed my help with a legitimate operation, you wouldn't have had to kill my handlers and attack a family gathering. Colonel Harrison's expression hardened slightly, the mask of friendliness slipping away to reveal something more calculating underneath. Your handlers were compromised, Michael. They were selling information about protected witnesses to the highest bidder. We had to eliminate them before they could expose more assets. Agent Rodriguez, who had been listening to the conversation while maintaining her defensive position, spoke up. "That's a lie, Colonel. We investigated those agents thoroughly. They were clean." "Agent Rodriguez," Harrison replied without looking at her, "there are levels of security clearance and information access that go far beyond what the FBI is privy to. Trust me when I say that the threat we're facing requires extraordinary measures." He turned back to Marcus, his voice taking on an urgent tone. "Michael, we have credible intelligence that a terrorist organization has acquired weapons-grade nuclear material, the same type of material that your unit was tasked with securing during Operation Blackwater. They're planning to detonate a dirty bomb in a major American city within the next 72 hours. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. If Harrison was telling the truth, then millions of innocent people were about to die unless someone could stop it. If he was lying, then this was an elaborate trap designed to lure Marcus out of hiding for reasons we couldn't yet understand. Marcus was clearly wrestling with the same dilemma. His training as a soldier told him to respond to legitimate threats against American civilians, but his experience with Harrison's deceptions during Operation Blackwater told him to be skeptical of anything his former commanding officer claimed. "Why do you need me specifically?" Marcus asked. "There are plenty of active-duty Special Forces operators who could handle a mission like this.
Why go to all this trouble to drag a retired asset back into service? Colonel Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Because the terrorists we're dealing with are led by someone you know very well. Someone who was supposed to have died during Operation Blackwater, but apparently survived and has been planning his revenge ever since. He paused for dramatic effect, watching Marcus's face carefully. Viktor Kozlov is alive, Michael, and he's coming for everyone who was involved in the mission that destroyed his operation 23 years ago. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He actually staggered backward, his face going pale as memories I couldn't access flooded through his mind. Viktor Kozlov was clearly someone significant from his past, someone whose survival changed everything about the threat they were facing. Agent Rodriguez was speaking rapidly into her radio, calling for additional backup and requesting immediate contact with her supervisors in Washington. The situation had escalated beyond a simple protective custody transfer into something that might require federal resources and high-level coordination. Colonel Harrison continued, pressing his advantage. Viktor has spent the last 2 decades building a network of contacts and acquiring resources. He's no longer just a black market arms dealer. He's become something much more dangerous, with the means and motivation to carry out attacks that will make previous terrorist incidents look minor in comparison. Marcus found his voice again, though it sounded strained. Kozlov was reported dead in the explosion at his compound. We saw the satellite footage of the crater where his facility used to be. The crater was real, Harrison acknowledged, but Viktor wasn't in the compound when your team destroyed it. He had been tipped off hours before the raid, probably by the same intelligence leak that compromised the entire operation. He escaped with a significant portion of his materials and has been planning his revenge ever since. The pieces of a larger puzzle were starting to come together in my mind. Operation Blackwater hadn't just been a simple mission that went wrong due to bad intelligence or tactical errors. It had been compromised from the beginning, possibly by someone within the American command structure who had their own agenda. "You knew," Marcus said, his voice filled with dawning realization. "You knew Kozlov had escaped, and you knew he would eventually come after the team members. That's why you put us in witness protection. Not to keep us safe from your cover-up, but to keep us available for when he finally surfaced." Colonel Harrison's mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating intelligence officer underneath. The witness protection program served multiple purposes, Michael. Yes, it kept you safe from Kozlov's immediate retaliation, but it also kept you under our control and monitoring, so we would know when he started making moves against you. Agent Rodriguez was staring at Harrison with growing horror. You used American citizens as bait. You put them in danger deliberately, knowing that a terrorist would eventually come after them. "I used valuable assets strategically," Harrison corrected coldly. "Michael and his team have skills and knowledge that make them uniquely qualified to deal with Viktor Kozlov. No one else has his operational patterns, his psychology, his weaknesses. They're the only ones who can stop him." The sirens outside were getting closer, and Harrison's men were starting to look nervous about the approaching police response. Local law enforcement would complicate the situation significantly, especially if they started asking questions about federal jurisdiction and the authority to conduct armed operations on American soil. Marcus seemed to be considering his options, weighing the risks of trusting Harrison against the potential consequences of refusing to act if the terrorist threat was real. "Show me the intelligence," he said finally. "If you want my cooperation, I need to see proof that Kozlov is really alive and planning an attack." Colonel Harrison nodded to one of his men, who produced a tablet computer loaded with files and photographs. As Marcus studied the screen, I could see his expression changing from skepticism to grim acceptance. Whatever he was looking at was convincing enough to overcome his distrust of his former commanding officer. "This communication was intercepted 3 days ago," Harrison explained, pointing to something on the screen. "It's in a code that only Kozlov and his inner circle would know, referencing locations and timetables that match our intelligence about the missing nuclear material."
Marcus continued scrolling through the information, occasionally asking technical questions about the intelligence sources and the methods used to verify the data. His military training was taking over, analyzing the threat assessment with professional detachment despite the personal stakes involved. Finally, he looked up from the tablet, his decision made.
If this is real, then we don't have a choice. But I have conditions. My wife comes with us under protective custody until this is resolved, and I want full operational control of the mission planning and execution. No interference from Washington, no political considerations, and no repeats of the Blackwater disaster. Colonel Harrison extended his hand again, and this time Marcus shook it. Agreed, but we need to move immediately. Every hour we delay gives Kozlov more time to prepare his attack. As the two men shook hands, sealing an agreement that would drag us back into a world of danger and deception I had hoped we had left behind forever, Agent Rodriguez stepped forward with her own demands. This entire operation needs to be coordinated with federal law enforcement, she insisted. If there's really a terrorist threat of this magnitude, the FBI, Homeland Security, and local authorities all need to be involved. You can't just disappear into the shadows and handle this privately. Colonel Harrison's expression suggested that federal oversight was the last thing he wanted, but the approaching sirens and the presence of wounded civilians made it clear that the situation was already beyond his ability to control quietly. Agent Rodriguez, he said carefully, there are aspects of this operation that involve classified programs and foreign intelligence assets. Full federal coordination might not be possible without compromising operational security. Then we'll work within those constraints, Rodriguez replied firmly, but American citizens are not going to be used as expendable assets without proper oversight and protection. The sound of police cars pulling into the driveway made it clear that decisions needed to be made immediately. Harrison's team couldn't simply execute a fighting withdrawal with wounded federal agents and traumatized civilians as witnesses. They were going to have to find a way to work within the legal system, at least superficially. Marcus looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of resignation and determination that spoke to the weight of the choice he was making. Isabella, I know this isn't what we planned for our lives, but if Harrison is right about Kozlov, then millions of people are going to die if we don't stop him. I can't walk away from that responsibility. I understood the choice he was making, even though it meant abandoning any hope of the quiet, normal life we had been trying to build together. The man I had married was fundamentally someone who would put the safety of innocent people ahead of his own comfort and security. It was one of the things I had always loved about him, even when I hadn't understood where it came from. We do this together, I said, taking his hand. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Colonel Harrison was already coordinating with his team to establish communication with the approaching police units, trying to defuse the immediate tactical situation while maintaining operational control over the larger mission. Agent Rodriguez was doing the same from her position, calling her supervisors to report the developing situation and request guidance on how to proceed. As local police surrounded the house and began establishing a perimeter, I realized that our quiet Easter dinner had become the opening move in what might be a race to prevent a catastrophic terrorist attack. The lies and deceptions that had defined our marriage for 8 years were finally giving way to a truth that was more dangerous than anything I had imagined. Margaret approached us as we prepared to leave with Harrison's team, her face still pale from shock, but her voice steady. I don't understand everything that's happening here, but I want you to know that you've been good to us. Whatever your real name is, whatever you've done in the past, you've been a good son to us for 15 years. The unexpected kindness in her voice, after years of subtle criticism and conditional acceptance, brought tears to my eyes. Even in the midst of chaos and danger, she was trying to offer comfort and connection to the man she had thought of as family, regardless of the deceptions that had made it possible. Robert appeared beside her, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. "Take care of yourselves," he said simply, "and come back when this is over. You'll always have a home here." As we walked toward the black SUVs that would take us into an uncertain and dangerous future, I found myself thinking about the strange twists of fate that had brought us to this moment. I had spent months researching my husband's hidden past, never suspecting that my curiosity would ultimately expose us to the very dangers we had been hiding from. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to find the truth that would set us free, I had instead triggered a chain of events that would force us back into the world of secrets and violence we had been trying to escape. But as Marcus helped me into the vehicle and we drove away from the only family we had known for years, I realized that I finally understood who I had really married. The quiet, methodical man who tended his garden and read financial reports was still there, but underneath was someone capable of making impossible choices in the face of unthinkable stakes. As we raced through the Connecticut countryside toward whatever confrontation awaited us, I knew that our marriage was about to be tested in ways that no couple should ever have to endure. Behind us, the Lewis family estate grew smaller in the distance, the site of 8 years of holiday gatherings and family memories that would now be forever marked by violence and revelation. Ahead of us lay the challenge of stopping a terrorist attack while navigating the treacherous waters of military politics and personal vendettas that stretched back more than 2 decades. The Easter Sunday that was supposed to be my farewell to a fictional family had instead become the beginning of the most dangerous chapter of our lives together. The safe house turned out to be a nondescript office building in downtown Hartford, the kind of place that housed insurance companies and accounting firms during normal business hours. At 3 in the morning, it felt like a ghost town, with only the security lights casting long shadows across empty hallways. Colonel Harrison's team had transformed the top floor into a makeshift command center, complete with communication equipment, tactical maps, and enough firepower to outfit a small army. Agent Rodriguez had insisted on federal oversight, and within 6 hours of the Easter Sunday incident, representatives from Homeland Security, the FBI, and the CIA had descended on our location. The presence of so many agencies should have made me feel safer, but the tension between the various officials suggested that this operation was far more complicated than anyone was willing to admit publicly. Marcus spent the first night reviewing intelligence files and reconnecting with resources from his past that I never knew existed. Watching him work, I could see the transformation from suburban husband to professional operative happening in real time. His posture changed, his speech patterns became more clipped and precise, and he seemed to develop an awareness of his surroundings that bordered on supernatural. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the only other surviving member of Marcus's original unit, arrived from Seattle looking like she had been through hell. The protective custody she had been in turned out to be more like house arrest, with federal marshals who had been killed in their beds 3 nights earlier. She had escaped through a bathroom window and had been running ever since, using tradecraft skills she hadn't needed for 20 years. Sarah was a small woman in her late 40s, with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that made it clear why she had been selected for special operations. When she looked at Marcus, I could see years of shared experiences and mutual respect that spoke to bonds forged under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. "Michael," she said when they were finally alone to talk, "this isn't just about Kozlov wanting revenge. The intelligence reports Harrison showed us are real, but they're not telling the whole story. There's something bigger happening here." Over the next several hours, Sarah laid out a theory that made my blood run cold. According to her analysis of the intercepted communications and the pattern of attacks on their unit members, Vinter Kozlov wasn't working alone. He had formed an alliance with elements within the American intelligence community, people who had their own reasons for wanting Operation Blackwater to remain buried forever. "The nuclear material isn't meant for a terrorist attack on American civilians," Sarah explained, spreading photographs and documents across the conference table. "It's meant to be used as evidence that American special forces were involved in illegal weapons trafficking 23 years ago." Kozlov is planning to detonate a small device and then release documentation proving that the enriched uranium came from stockpiles that we were supposed to secure and destroy. The implications were staggering. If Kozlov could prove that American special forces had been involved in the theft and sale of weapons-grade nuclear material, it would trigger investigations that could topple governments and destroy the careers of dozens of high-ranking officials. More importantly, it would provide justification for retaliatory attacks against American interests around the world. Marcus studied the evidence Sarah had compiled, his face growing darker with each revelation. Harrison knew this from the beginning. He didn't bring us back together to stop a terrorist attack. He brought us back to be scapegoats when Kozlov's plan succeeds. Agent Rodriguez, who had been listening from across the room, joined our conversation with files of her own. "I've been doing some digging into Colonel Harrison's recent activities. He's been meeting regularly with defense contractors and private security firms that have significant financial interests in maintaining current military operations overseas. If proof emerged that special forces units were involved in illegal activities, it could lead to massive budget cuts and contract cancellations." The picture that emerged was of a conspiracy that went far beyond simple revenge or cover-up. Harrison and his allies needed Kozlov's plan to succeed just enough to justify eliminating the remaining witnesses to Operation Blackwater, but not so much that it actually exposed the full truth about what had happened 23 years ago. "We're expendable assets," Sarah said grimly. "Always have been. The only difference now is that they need us to play our parts one more time before they dispose of us permanently." As dawn broke over Hartford, casting pale light through the office windows, Marcus made a decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of continuing to react to Harrison's manipulation and Kozlov's threats, we were going to take control of the situation ourselves. "We're going to find Kozlov first," he announced to the room full of federal agents and military personnel. "We're going to stop his plan, but we're going to do it on our terms, with full documentation of everything we discover. No more cover-ups, no more classified files, no more protecting the people who sent us into that disaster in the first place." Agent Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "The FBI can provide support and resources, but only if we do this by the book. No vigilante justice, no unauthorized operations, and complete transparency about what we find." Colonel Harrison, who had been notably absent from our morning briefings, chose that moment to make his entrance. He looked like he hadn't slept, and there was something in his expression that suggested his own position was more precarious than he had initially let on. "I'm afraid your idealistic approach isn't going to work, Michael," he said, pouring himself coffee from the machine someone had set up in the corner. "The people we're dealing with don't play by FBI rules and congressional oversight committees. If you want to stop Kozlov, you're going to have to be willing to operate in the shadows." Marcus stood to face his former commanding officer, and the tension between them was palpable. "The shadows are where this whole mess started, Harrison. Every time we've trusted you to handle things quietly, people have died, and the truth has been buried deeper. And every time idealistic officers have tried to expose classified operations, national security has been compromised and American lives have been lost," Harrison shot back. "You think the world operates according to your moral absolutes, but the reality is much more complicated." Sarah stepped between them before the argument could escalate into something physical. "Enough. We're wasting time arguing about methodology when Kozlov could be moving his materials into position right now. Michael, what's your plan?" Over the next several hours, we developed a strategy that combined Marcus's operational expertise, Sarah's intelligence analysis, Agent Rodriguez's law enforcement resources, and my own research skills. The plan was ambitious and dangerous, requiring us to essentially go rogue from the official operation while maintaining enough federal cooperation to avoid being arrested as domestic terrorists ourselves. The key breakthrough came when I remembered something from my months of research into Operation Blackwater. While searching through old news archives, I had found references to a series of unexplained accidents and incidents at shipping facilities along the eastern seaboard. At the time, I had dismissed them as unrelated to Marcus's situation, but now they seemed to form a pattern that pointed toward Kozlov's current activities. "He's not planning to detonate the device in a major city," I realized as I spread maps and shipping records across the table. "He's planning to detonate it at sea, just close enough to shore to be detected by American monitoring systems, but far enough out to avoid massive civilian casualties." Marcus studied my analysis, his expression shifting from skepticism to understanding. "A demonstration, not an attack. He shows that he has the capability and the materials, releases the documentation about their origin, and then threatens to use the rest of his stockpile unless his demands are met." Sarah nodded approvingly. "It's actually brilliant from a strategic standpoint. He gets maximum political impact with minimal risk of turning world opinion completely against him. The international community might even support his claims if he can prove American involvement in illegal weapons trafficking." Agent Rodriguez was already on her phone, coordinating with Coast Guard and Navy units to begin monitoring shipping traffic and radiation detection along the coastline. But we all knew that if Kozlov was as careful and well-connected as he seemed to be, he would have planned for official countermeasures. The real challenge would be finding him before he could execute his plan, and that would require the kind of off-the-books investigation that federal agencies couldn't officially authorize. Marcus and Sarah would need to use their old contacts and operational networks, people who existed in the gray areas between legitimate intelligence work and criminal activity. "I need to make some calls," Marcus said, pulling out a phone I had never seen before. "People who owe me favors from the old days, people who might have heard whispers about Kozlov's movements." As Marcus began reaching out to his shadow network of former operatives and intelligence assets, I found myself thinking about how far we had come from that Easter dinner just days earlier. The quiet suburban life we had built together was completely gone, replaced by a world of tactical briefings and threat assessments that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Sarah approached me while Marcus was occupied with his phone calls. "Isabella, I want you to understand what you're getting into here. Once we start down this path, there's no going back to normal life. The people we're fighting have long memories and unlimited resources. Even if we stop Kozlov, they'll always see you as a threat." Her words should have frightened me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity. "Normal life was an illusion anyway," I replied. "At least now I know what we're really fighting for." The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of Marcus's former contacts, a man who now worked in maritime security consulting, had noticed unusual activity at a private shipping terminal in Baltimore. Several vessels had arrived and departed on schedules that didn't match their registered cargo manifests, and the terminal's normal security protocols had been suspended for special operations. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with Baltimore field offices to begin surveillance of the facility, while Marcus and Sarah planned a reconnaissance mission that would violate numerous federal laws and international treaties. The irony of using illegal methods to prevent an illegal attack wasn't lost on any of us. But we seemed to be operating in a world where traditional rules no longer applied. Colonel Harrison made several attempts to regain control of the operation, bringing pressure from his superiors in Washington and threatening to have us all arrested for interfering with national security matters. But Agent Rodriguez had built her own coalition of support within the federal bureaucracy, people who were more interested in preventing a catastrophic attack than protecting institutional reputations. The Baltimore reconnaissance confirmed our worst fears and our best hopes.
Kozlov was indeed operating from the shipping terminal, using a network of legitimate businesses and criminal organizations to move materials and personnel. But his security was focused on preventing official law enforcement infiltration, not the kind of direct action approach that Marcus and Sarah had been trained for. "It's a fortress," Sarah reported, after spending 12 hours studying the facility through high-powered optics. "But it's designed to keep out investigators and surveillance teams, not combat operators. If we can get inside the perimeter, we can probably reach the primary targets before they can mount an effective defense." Marcus was studying shipping schedules and tide charts, looking for the optimal window to launch their assault. "We have maybe 18 hours before the next vessel leaves port. If Kozlov's device is on board, that's our last chance to stop it before it reaches international waters." The final planning session brought together federal agents, military advisors, and the remaining members of Marcus's original unit in a coordination effort that felt like something out of a war movie. Everyone understood that failure would likely result in an international incident that could destabilize governments and trigger military conflicts around the world. Agent Rodriguez pulled me aside for a private conversation as the others finalized their tactical preparations. "Isabella, you know there's a good chance your husband doesn't come back from this mission. Are you prepared for that possibility?" The question forced me to confront fears I had been avoiding since this whole crisis began. Marcus was walking into a situation that combined all the dangers of his past with all the uncertainties of his present. But I had also seen him transform from a man haunted by secrets into someone who was finally fighting for something he believed in completely. "He's been running from this for 20 years, I said finally. "If this is what it takes for him to finally be free, then we have to take that chance." The assault on the Baltimore shipping terminal began at dawn, coordinated between Marcus's team and federal agents positioned around the perimeter. I watched from a mobile command center as drone footage showed the initial breach. Marcus and Sarah moving through the facility with the fluid precision of operators who had never really stopped being soldiers. The resistance they encountered was immediate and professional, confirming that Kozlov had been expecting exactly this kind of response.
But Marcus's team had the advantage of knowing their enemy's psychology and operational patterns, allowing them to anticipate defensive measures and exploit weaknesses that wouldn't have been obvious to conventional forces. The nuclear device, when they finally located it, turned out to be smaller and more sophisticated than anyone had expected. It was designed not for maximum destruction, but for maximum political impact, packed with sensors and communication equipment that would broadcast detailed information about its detonation and its origins. Sarah's voice came through the communication system with a mixture of relief and concern. "We've got the device, but there's something else here. Documents, communications equipment, enough evidence to prove everything we suspected about Operation Blackwater and more." As Marcus and Sarah secured the materials and prepared for extraction, Agent Rodriguez coordinated with federal prosecutors to begin building cases against everyone involved in the conspiracy. The evidence they had found would expose not just the cover-up of the original operation, but the ongoing efforts to manipulate and eliminate the surviving witnesses. Colonel Harrison made one final attempt to regain control of the situation, arriving at the command center with what he claimed were orders from the highest levels of government to classify all materials and terminate the investigation. But Agent Rodriguez had anticipated this move, and her own superiors were already coordinating with congressional oversight committees to ensure the evidence would see the light of day. "It's over, Harrison," she told him, as federal marshals placed him under arrest. 23 years of lies and cover-ups, and it's finally over. The aftermath of the Baltimore operation brought revelations that reached into the highest levels of government and military leadership. Viktor Kozlov, when finally apprehended, proved surprisingly willing to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for protection from the same forces that had been hunting Marcus's team. The trials that followed exposed a conspiracy that had corrupted multiple administrations and compromised countless operations over more than 2 decades. Marcus and Sarah testified before congressional committees, their faces finally revealed to the public after years of hiding in the shadows. For me, the most significant revelation was discovering that our entire marriage, while built on deceptions and false identities, had still been based on genuine love and commitment. The man I had fallen in love with was exactly who I thought he was, despite all the secrets and lies that had surrounded our life together. 6 months after that Easter Sunday confrontation, Marcus and I found ourselves in a small house in Oregon, far from the Connecticut estate where our ordeal had begun. We were finally free to build a life based on truth rather than carefully maintained fiction, though we both carried scars from the experience that would never completely heal. Margaret and Robert Lewis, despite everything they had learned about their fictional son, continued to send Christmas cards and birthday greetings to our new address. The bonds that had formed over 15 years of shared holidays and family gatherings had proven stronger than the deceptions that had created them. Agent Rodriguez visited us occasionally, bringing updates on the ongoing investigations and prosecutions that had grown out of our revelations. The full truth about Operation Blackwater had triggered reforms in military oversight and intelligence operations that would prevent similar abuses in the future. Sarah had accepted a position teaching military history at a small college in Vermont, finally able to use her expertise in an environment that didn't require classified clearances or operational secrecy. She visited us often, and the 3 of us had formed a bond based on shared trauma and mutual survival that felt more like family than anything I had ever experienced. On quiet evenings, as Marcus tended his new garden and I worked on the book I was writing about our experiences, I sometimes thought about the woman who had dropped that champagne flute on Easter Sunday. She had been so focused on winning approval from people who weren't even really family, so desperate to understand secrets that turned out to be more dangerous than she could have imagined. The truth had indeed set us free, but it had cost us everything we thought we wanted in order to give us something we hadn't known we needed. We were no longer the suburban couple trying to fit into someone else's definition of normal. We were partners who had faced the worst possible circumstances together and emerged with a love that was finally based on complete honesty. Marcus often said that the real tragedy of Operation Blackwater hadn't been the deaths or the cover-up, but the years of isolation and deception that had followed. Being forced to live as someone else, to maintain relationships based on lies, had been its own kind of death. The crisis that had brought everything into the open had also brought him back to life. As winter settled over our Oregon home, bringing snow that reminded me of Connecticut Easters and family gatherings that would never happen again, I realized that some stories don't have neat endings. They have transformations, revelations, and new beginnings that grow out of the ashes of everything that came before. The FBI agent's words that had shattered our Easter gathering had also shattered the prison of lies that had contained our marriage for 8 years. We had lost our safe suburban life, our carefully constructed identities, and our fictional family relationships. But we had found something more in return: the freedom to finally be ourselves, together, without apology or explanation. Looking back now, I can see that every choice we made, every revelation we uncovered, every danger we faced was leading us toward this moment of quiet contentment in our Oregon kitchen. The woman who had spent years trying to win Margaret Lewis's approval had been replaced by someone who understood that the only approval that mattered was the kind that grew out of mutual respect and complete honesty. Marcus looked up from his gardening magazine as snow began to fall outside our window, catching the light in a way that reminded me of the crystal fragments from that shattered champagne flute. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question that had become our evening ritual. "Just one," I replied, the answer that had become my evening truth. "I wish I had dropped that glass sooner." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.